why don't we go ahead and get started? Dylan and Josh, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Caitlin. I'm one of the admins of Locally Optimistic, but I'm mostly here just to facilitate a conversation. So I will hand it over to Dylan and Josh of Spectacles and let y'all take it away.
Yeah, I can start.
Awesome. Josh,
so first of all, thanks for having us, Caitlin. These events are awesome and it's always fun to be a part of, and thanks to all of you for joining. Just a quick bit of background. So Dylan and I are really like analytics engineers first and kind of vendors second, but we come from the Looker DBT world. Dylan by means of consulting, myself by a couple companies, and we now run a company called Spectacles, which is an automated testing continuous integration tool for Looker. And that's what we'll be showing you today. So specifically, we're here today to talk about our integration, which we've just launched with DBT, which allows you to basically test the impact of DBT changes on Looker. And so I'll hand it off to Dylan to do an intro as well, but we're just excited to show you what we've built. And if you're interested, please do get in touch and we can do a demo and a trial and all that good stuff.
Awesome, thanks, Josh. So yeah, as Josh said, we met through the DBT and like Locally Optimistic community. Though we've co-founded a business together, we've actually only met in person twice. Josh, for reasons that are mostly COVID related, has never actually met our other co-founder. So we are a fully distributed team and really genuinely would not have met without basically the DBT, Looker, and Locally Optimistic communities. So Josh said, my background, I used to lead data teams in-house, and about 3 years ago, went freelance to what certainly 3 years ago wasn't called analytics engineering consulting, definitely is now, and somewhere over the way I transitioned, but also somewhere along the way, as Josh said, we co-founded this business really to solve our own problems. I was basically talking, when we started this 2 years ago, we were basically talking about this problem of you make changes to DBT over here and Looker breaks. And it's kind of taken us a while to get to solving that exact connection. We focused on Looker first. We've been really excited about getting this feature out. And I think for a long time, it's really what we have been aiming for. And so we're really excited to talk to you about it. I am wary that not everyone will have seen our prior demo with Locally Optimistic. And so I'm just going to do a quick spiel of like what Spectacles does or what Spectacles did prior to 3 weeks ago before we released this feature. I won't demo that, but Caitlin has uploaded the prior video to YouTube. Please go have a look. We also have some demos on our website. So I'm just going to talk about that quickly. What I'm then going to do is talk through and demo our DBT integration. And we're going to use the term DBT integration a lot today. What you'll come to find is DBT integration is one, partly what it does, two, just a branding exercise to some degree, because this integration does work with any staging data set. So anytime you want to test Looker against some arbitrary non-production data set, what we're going to talk about today is going to work. But it just happens to integrate natively with Dbt Cloud and then provides an API to do kind of everything else. And on that API, we've got David Wallace and Jacob here. Look, there's Jacob from Dutchy, who are a customer of ours who have gone the API route to build a bunch of this out. And we're also going to have a demo from them to just talk through how they've done it, show exactly what their setup looks like, because it's more impressive than anything we would create in like a sandbox environment to show you ourselves. So that's a lot of preamble. Without further ado, so Spectacles is, as Josh said, a continuous integration or automated testing tool. We use automated testing just because there is some of the Looker audience who are more from the analyst background than the kind of analytics engineering background and are less familiar with terms like continuous engineering. But fundamentally, you can refer to them as either. And really what we aim to do is make sure that as part of your change development process, part of your software development lifecycle, nothing in Looker breaks. And that can include a couple of different things. We want to make sure that all of the SQL in your LookML is always compatible with your data warehouse. So you're not adding a dimension that doesn't match up with your database so that your users get a database error when they go and run a dashboard or run a look. Likewise, we want to make sure that you're not renaming things such that it breaks content, stuff that would appear in the content validator, and make sure that that never happens as part of a PR. So we really want to automate and make it very apparent to you when you are breaking something, when you are making a change that breaks your instance, and stop you from doing that on your pull request automatically, rather than having you have to go to the content validator, figure out if any of the errors that are there are yours, try to debug them, whittle them down to the project that you're in. It's just a very time consuming and labor-intensive process, which as a result, people don't do. And it's how you get to instances that I imagine many of us have seen where there's just a ton of content in the content validator because it just hasn't been kind of nurtured well over time. And then third, we let you run LookML data tests. So if you have invested in LookML data tests and are using that in addition to DBT or just in isolation to run tests, we will run those for you as well. And so those are the three what we call validators that we run. SQL, making sure all your SQL runs, content, making sure you don't break content and it doesn't show up in the content validator, and data tests, making sure that all your data tests run in Looker. The primary workflow we had prior to 3 weeks ago was people would run those primarily on a schedule. So making sure that every hour Looker is still healthy, kind of just like a hourly health check. And then most importantly, on Looker pull requests. But what's really cool is as of 3 weeks ago with this DBT integration, we are now able to check when you make a change to your database as a result of DBT, or not even make a change, when you propose a change to your DBT code base, and that could be, as I said, your Dataform code base, your Airflow, Dagster, Prefect, pipelines, whatever it might be. If you are generating a staging data set that represents what will be the state of your database based on that code, we can now tell you in Looker whether that is going to break anything when it gets merged in. Because it's really, really easy if you imagine working on a DBT project to rename a column that you're not aware has a downstream dependency in Looker, or change a data type such that the transformations that are happening in Looker won't work anymore. It's really hard to have that full end-to-end integration test, and that's what we aim to do. Let me, on that note, jump in. So for people who haven't seen it before, this is the Spectacles UI. What you get is a history of all of the runs that have happened recently. Very similar to kind of any CI or orchestration tool. You kind of come in and see the batch jobs that have happened most recently. You can see here we've got some that happen on Looker, pull requests, some that run daily, a range of runs that happen. What we're going to talk about today is how that DBT integration works. So fundamentally, the way Spectacles runs all its tests is via the API, via the Looker API. So every time a Spectacles test kicks off, you are going to have given us API credentials for your Looker instance, and we're going to be firing off calls to your Looker instance to both run queries, run the content validator, just do a bunch of health checks to make sure that everything is still working. And by default, we will do that against your production data set. So when you open a Looker pull request, we will be doing that against your production data set in BigQuery, Databricks, Snowflake, Redshift. We've had people on MySQL and Postgres. Really, there's a long list of databases that Looker integrates with. As a result, we can work with all of them. And so there's a couple of prerequisites that we need for the DBT integration, because fundamentally, to test a different data set, you need to have configured your LookML in a specific way. The examples here today I'm going to show you are going to be on BigQuery, but fundamentally this works on anything where there's like the concept of a schema, database project, data set, that type of stuff. By the way, if at any point anyone has any questions, just raise your real hand, raise your virtual hand, shout at me. All are acceptable ways of interrupting me. So the first prerequisite you need is you need to actually make a small change to your LookML. Tons of DBT organizations using DBT do this today, and you can see ours here. So instead of having hard-coded, in this case, data set and project references, but on Snowflake it could be database and schema references, we have made them configurable with user attributes. That is something you need to do to leverage this functionality, because you need to let Spectacles know how they can alter what data set you're looking at. And so you don't need both of these necessarily, but depending on your setup, you'll need one or the other. And if you're using Dbt Cloud, you will certainly need the data set or schema, like not to be hard-coded and to be set as a user attribute. And what this lets us do is update this before a run so that we can run all our tests and queries against a specific data set of your choice. So the second thing you need to do is to actually update Spectacles to say, hey, here are the user attributes that I want to be configurable by you, and here are the default values. Because after we're done updating it to some DBT schema, we need to make sure that we reset it back to your production data set prior to the next run so that you're not constantly in perpetuity then testing some staging data set. I'm going to talk about the Dbt Cloud integration first, but we'll then talk more about the API. So what's cool about having these user attributes is it suddenly, and you can do this manually in the UI, so constantly having to move around all your faces, is you can run an arbitrary suite, a job, against an arbitrary data set. So what we have here are the different suites defined, effectively the different jobs defined in spectacles. And you can see that there's a bunch of stuff configured, particularly what validators are going to run against what explores and all of that. I won't spend too much time going into these. It doesn't matter too much, but effectively you can enable and disable all three validators, set them to query specific explorers. There's some additional config on some of them. And so then what the user attributes allow you to do if you were to do this manually is actually to say, okay, instead of testing the analytics data set, I want to test Dbt Dylan. And that would go and run all those tests and tell you whether the data set that is in that schema or data set in BigQuery is compatible with Looker at the time, either your production Looker instance or your dev node. But fundamentally, we don't want you to have to do that manually every time you open a Dbt pull request. What we want to happen is for that to happen seamlessly. For you to open a Dbt pull request, for Dbt to check that everything is passing there, and then for Looker for Spectacles to check that everything is going to work in Looker once that code gets merged in. To do that, we need a couple pieces of information. Actually, let me go to the one that's actually configured for this. We basically need three things. We need the location of your Dbt repo. This is where ours is. This repo over here, I'm going to jump into it in a second. We need the Dbt Cloud job ID, which is the ID of the job that runs your CI checks in Dbt Cloud. And that is because, as I'll show you in a second, that job ID becomes part of the unique schema name that Dbt Cloud produces for you when you open a Dbt Cloud pull request, or a Dbt pull request when integrated with Dbt Cloud. And then the third is, of the user attributes that you have made configurable by Spectacles, you need to tell us which one controls the schema, because we don't know, and we need to be told, okay, actually, when you're using this integration with Dbt Cloud, here's the user attribute that you should update on a run to make sure that we're kind of querying the right data. So I'm just going to show you a bit of our code now, just to show what I'm going to break effectively. So you can see here, we've got a view called dim organizations in Looker. It pulls from our dim organizations view in Dbt, model in Dbt. And the columns that are important here are these two. We've got two dimensions, one called count project, one called count runs, each of which are querying columns of the same name in BigQuery. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and make a change to Dbt. So I'm going to find that file. And I'm going to open a pull request where I rename these columns. And now a couple things could be the reason for this. I probably want to rename them because of whatever naming convention I prefer. I may not be aware they're being used by Looker. We may have, Looker may be one of many BI tools, and I may not have context of all of them. I may just be a data engineer who's kind of jumping into the Dbt project, whatever it might be. I make this change and it's not clear to me what the downstream implications are, or I think there are none. We've got a pretty small Dbt and Looker project here for this demo, but you can imagine if you have hundreds of views in both Looker and Dbt, understanding the dependencies of these things can be pretty complex and very time consuming, error prone, all of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename these two. Instead of count projects, count runs, we're going to do number of projects, number of runs. Then I'm going to open a PR. And what's going to happen now is that first, Dbt Cloud is going to do what it normally does. And so for those who aren't familiar with Dbt Cloud or don't use this functionality, what Dbt Cloud does whenever it opens, whenever you've set up a job to run on PR, is it will run a series of commands, typically at the very least Dbt run and Dbt test, into a staging schema, into a schema that has the structure of Dbt Cloud PR and then a series of numbers. And so what that'll do is it'll basically tell you, okay, does this PR break anything internal to Dbt? Does it break a model from running? Does it stop a test from working in Dbt? Whatever it is. But it doesn't do any testing of the contract with that data set and anything downstream. So if we jump in here, we can see the Dbt Cloud has kicked off. And in a second, we will see that it will do its thing. There you go. So it is doing a Dbt run into Dbt Cloud PR, and then this is the job ID, and this is our pull request number. But fundamentally, in BigQuery, that data set is going to go get generated. It's going to run the handful of models we have here, which it'll show me in a second. Come on, Dbt Cloud. Let's try clicking through again. There you go. So you can see that it has built everything into Dbt Cloud PR 835841. And so we know that we basically have a staging data set, a data set that is representative of what our data will become when this pull request gets merged in that schema. Then because Spectacles knows that that is the standard kind of schema structure for a Dbt Cloud PR, we then immediately kick off our tests. And you can see that instead of querying our analytics data set, we're now querying the Dbt Cloud PR 835841 data set and have updated that in Looker for this run. And so if we go to Looker, we can see the queries that are being run. And the way we run all our SQL checks is through SQL queries. So we're actually testing your database. Oh, let me grab one of these failing ones. I just lost them. Anyway, so you can see here as we run our very lightweight checks that we're now pointed to this schema and we're checking if any of the queries error. We talked about this in our last demo with LO. I'm just going to go through it quickly again. The way that we check that everything is compatible with your database is we go and find every Explorer in Looker. We build a query with every dimension in that Explorer and run it with a where false, a where 1 equals 2, and a limit 0. That ensures that it checks that everything works with your database. It doesn't scan any data, which on BigQuery means it doesn't cost you anything. And more importantly, it doesn't cost you any time. These queries, despite being the initial ones larger, all typically take less than a second. And then what happens is if an Explorer fails, so if it explores that first pass where we've used every dimension, we then drill in one by one to find the specific dimensions that are broken within an Explorer. Because we don't want to just tell you, hey, here's the Explorer that's broken. We want to tell you, here are the 3 dimensions that are broken in that Explorer. Does that all make sense to everyone? Anyone got any questions about any of that? Cool. So I'm going to come back to GitHub here and see, actually, hey, something's going to break in Looker. So as a result of this Dbt pull request, I'm now being told that there is a downstream dependency in Looker that is broken. Previously, and still today, frankly, most orgs just check this. They only check that Dbt itself passes. There isn't much contract validation with Looker to actually make sure that nothing in Looker is going to break as a result of this change. And so if we click through to this report, you'll see that 3 of our 4 Explorers have errored, and that each Explorer has an error on count projects and count runs because we can't find those columns in the database. Looker's saying, hey, we tried to run against this data set, and we think that when Dbt gets merged in and this becomes your source of truth, that these 2 dimensions and all these Explorers are going to have errored. Similarly, we're not running them here, but if you had data tests that made sure that revenue for a specific month in Looker was always going to be some number, and you had made a change to Dbt that such that that would break, you'd catch them here as well. You don't tend to run content validation errors on Dbt pull requests because content validation errors can only come when you actually change your Looker code, but you typically will test both your SQL validator and your assert validator. And so I can then do a couple things. I can either go and revert my changes if kind of they're not so strongly opinionated that we 100% need the renaming to be the way it is. Or secondly, I can then go and at least now I know, okay, here are the things that need to be covered in a corresponding Looker pull request that, that we need to open to make sure that there's compatibility there. And so in theory, what I can do, this is as live codey as this demo gets. Let me just make a new branch. We know that our primary branch is clean because we run an hourly check. And what I'm going to do now is go and change both of these. Now, we don't yet have functionality where I could open my Looker pull request and have it pointed to an arbitrary data set. What I can do is run a manual check. So what I'm going to do is I've committed this code, fixing dbt change. So I'm not going to open a PR there, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go run my tests. So I'm going to run this same job, but I'm going to update the data set, which is that. And I'm going to run against the dev branch that I've just created to make sure that the two are compatible. And so now what I'll know is, okay, well, we have a dbt pull request that's going to break Looker, but I have a branch ready to be merged in that has the corresponding change such that they match up. We're going to be doing some work in the future such that you can kind of do this through your Looker PR and just arbitrarily tell it what data set to run it through. But right now, people are running it as typically a manual check to make sure that they match up. You get the clean bill of health. You can see the branch we're on. You can see the schema. And so you could, if you're the only developer, just be confident that you can merge your dbt stuff in. Or you could, come and comment, here is proof that the corresponding Looker PR fixes this, for example. And so you can check an arbitrary branch against an arbitrary data set. The dbt side happens automatically. Very soon, both sides will be happening automatically, such that you can kind of do it arbitrarily through the PR itself. I'm going to hand over to David in a second to show what this looks like for non-dbt cloud use cases. But I want to just stop there and see if anyone has any questions before we continue. Okay, so the context here is David from Dutchy. They use dbt, but they don't use dbt cloud for a range of reasons around how they want to be able to customize their pipeline. What he's going to show off here is we have an API where you can do all of this as well. You can make an API call to create a run that says, hey, test production against this schema, and it all works the same way via the API. And so David, if it works for you, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Dylan. Let me share my screen real quick. And I apologize for my dogs barking in the background. They somehow always know when I'm in a meeting. So yeah, we actually historically did use dbt cloud for our CI runs. We switched off of it pretty recently. The rationale for switching off of it was that running our own dbt CI through GitHub Actions gives us a little bit more control over how we dynamically create dbt run statements. So for example, in our current CI suite, for incremental models, for example, we can actually scan the PR. We can see if incremental models have been changed as part of the PR, and then we can essentially dynamically create dbt statements to say, run this model, run the incremental models in full refresh, and then run them in incremental mode after that. So it gives us just a little bit more control over how we create dbt run statements, basically. Part of that, though, is we recently integrated spectacles into those run statements, into our GitHub Actions pipeline. And what you're looking at in front of me right here, and I'm assuming everyone can see my screen here. This is basically the main entry point for how we do our CI runs, our dbt CI runs. What's happening here is we are scanning to see if any files have changed. We're mapping any of those files that have changed as part of the PR to dbt nodes. And we're saying, if any dbt nodes have changed as part of this PR, spin up some ephemeral clones of production via this context manager, run these dynamic dbt commands that have been created. And if the spectacles flag was given, then also run spectacles as part of this suite. The spectacles client you're seeing here is a very, very lightweight Python client that we have for interacting with the spectacles API. We instantiate a spectacles client. We create a spectacles run, and I can give you an example of what that looks like in practice. This is a real PR that Jacob, our data analyst, submitted a week or two ago. You can see here pretty innocuous changes as part of this PR, very similar to what Dylan showed you. And mechanically, all of this works very similar to everything that Dylan showed you as well. But if we go into the checks portion here, I can show you what our CI pipeline actually looks like. Let's go right into the portion where we're actually running dbt commands. So for example, you can see that we've dynamically created a dbt run statement, or we are creating a dbt run statement, and we're throwing a spectacles flag saying that as part of this CI suite, we want to run spectacles. we are spinning up a bunch of ephemeral clones of our production databases. And then here is the dynamic dbt run statement that we're running. We're running all of our tests or all of our models, testing them. And then you can see here, after we've run all of our models, we actually run spectacles as part of this. You can see here, the spectacles run of our PR suite actually finished with a failed status. So I can go in here, go see what's up. And I can see, just like Dylan showed you, I can see that, oh, okay, Jacob's changes essentially removed a field called review and reviewed by that would in theory break Looker. So yeah, this is just kind of showing how it works for us. Again, we're not running Dbt Cloud, but the API makes it super easy to just programmatically trigger these jobs against ephemeral databases. Sorry about my dogs.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, and so as David said, as you can show, our API is like intentionally pretty narrow. It lets you, it's really built to just do that very specific thing. It's like create a job, go run it, get the results. We really want it to be very easy to deploy. David, I don't know how long it took you guys, but we find for most
probably
people
probably about a week, maybe.
Yeah. Like it's as part of, and was that part of your full DBT, like redoing the whole DBT stuff as well?
Partially, yeah.
Yeah. So tends to be a reasonably small lift. And so if you're using Dbt Cloud, you can do it that way. If you are using Dbt not Cloud, you can do it that way. What's also cool is, as David showed, really, he is not, Spectacles doesn't know anything about the fact that David's running Dbt behind the scenes. All Spectacles knows is, hey, we've generated the staging data set over here. Go and check if that's compatible with Looker. And so that's the real power. I mean, the Dbt Cloud integration is awesome, and we have a ton of people using it, and it works really seamlessly. And we see a lot of our customers using, I mean, frankly, effectively Fivetran, Snowflake, Dbt Cloud, Spectacles, Looker. But let's say you have Airflow in there, you have Dataform in there, you have any, your own custom SQL stuff, or maybe you're even doing blue-green deploys. You're doing blue-green deploys managed yourself for DBT, and you want to test it that way. There's just a whole range of flexibility. As long as you've generated a schema or a database that has the staging data, you can make sure that it's compatible before you promote it. And that for us, we had someone describe it to us as like the missing piece between DBT and Looker. They're both tools that really are like fundamentally in the DNA of our company. Josh and I really wouldn't have met without either of them. And so we're like just really pleased to be able to integrate the two. And it's been really fun. I've actually just been doing some of this work myself. And despite the fact that I don't think I make errors, it caught a bunch of my errors in the last hour as I was doing some work internally. So yeah, so happy to stop there. Happy to take any questions. Can talk a little bit about our roadmap around these, because there's some like last mile stuff that we'll be tackling over the next few months that I can talk about, but certainly want to stop there first and see if anyone has anything they want to ask.
Yeah, I do have a quick question. Is this limited to the Spectacles? The Spectacles UI, I think, requires a, like, is the hosted version, right? Is this also supported on these Spectacles, like I guess CLI or Tool 2?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is not today. So today, this is only in the hosted solution. You could certainly replicate some of this if you wanted to using the CLI, but you would have to do the user attribute updating yourself around it. So you'd have to like update the user attribute, run Spectacles, and then reset the user attribute yourself. And I've spoken to a few people about it. I don't know if any of them are actually doing it. A lot of them, frankly, not to like sell too hard, by the time you've gone to the effort of doing that, unless there's like a security reason to, or like flexibility reason to not, we find that most people with whom we have that conversation end up using the hosted solution, even if kind of as in David's case, you end up doing a ton of it via the API, because it just doesn't make sense for you to end up building that out and maintaining it. But certainly, yeah, you could do it. You could kind of wrap it in API calls to Looker that update the relevant user attributes and do it that way. I haven't personally spoken to anyone who has done that yet, but it's totally possible.
Noted. Good to know. Thanks.
Josh, anything you want to add that I have not talked about?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
So the final bit around the roadmap that I think will kind of, I mean, it's a fully fledged feature today, but like might round it off even more, is the ability when you open the DBT pull request to automatically say what the corresponding Looker branch is, or when you open the Looker pull request, tell us through like a label on the PR what the corresponding data set is, so you don't have to do that final bit manually. But that's really, I think, we'll tackle that in the next little bit, and is really the last bit that kind of might finish this off. But in theory, you can do it all. It just today requires one final manual step there to do the like Looker branch against arbitrary data set. Or again, you can do it by the API. Awesome.
Cool. I think that's pretty much it, unless there are any other questions. But if you did want to get in touch and see a demo or start a trial for your company, our website is spectacles.dev, and you can book a demo directly on there. It's about a 45-minute call. We'll probably cut the demo short and just do more of an actual like onboarding to the trial, since you've already seen a lot of the functionality here. But also, to the extent that you have other ideas for ways that you would like Looker to be tested, or you would like DBT to be tested, this is very much our area of focus, is really improving the developer lifecycle. So would love to hear any ideas that have come up, in LO, Slack, or wherever is convenient. But thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome. This is like a huge step forward. This is really amazing. So if there are no other questions, we'll wrap up. But Josh and Dylan, we really appreciate you giving everybody a little demo, and I hope that you'll hear from a lot more folks in the near future.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for having us.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.